Hi everyone, I'm Miss Fu, Principal Tutor of Econs Lab. Today I'll give you a quick fix on the effects of tariffs on imports. Alright, so let me start off by actually drawing the diagram and I'll do the explanation along the way. Alright, so what we have in the y-axis is actually the price, okay, and of course our x-axis will be the output, okay. Now, so what happens is that we will have our domestic demand curve as well as the domestic supply curve. And of course, we will not actually be doing the intersection of the supply and the domestic demand, because that is a case where it is autarky. Autarky meaning to say that the countries are actually self-dependent, and so they do not actually have to trade. So basically that is not the subject over here. So what we'll do is that we'll actually be drawing our world supply curve, which basically shows that so long as the price is at PW, the supply of the good would have been perfectly price elastic. Okay, the reason being, what happens is that for each and every country, right, that's producing the good, okay, they are more or less like a price taker, because they are unable to actually control the price of the good in view that they are actually one of the many players in the market. So what happens is that with this price PW, okay, the associated quantity demanded for the good is at QD, but at the price PW, the domestic suppliers are only willing to supply QS. And so what happens is that there will actually be what we call a shortfall of QSQD, and this amount will have to be imported. Okay, so QSQD is the amount that has to be imported. Now, what happens is that if let's say we were to do an analysis based on QD, then the consumer surplus would actually be the area between what consumers are willing and able to pay and what they actually pay. And so this red triangle here gives us the consumer surplus. Alright, and so what will be the producer surplus then? For the quantity QS that's being produced by the producer, we'll say that this small triangle over here will be what is the producer surplus. Okay, producer surplus. So that is basically before the tariff is actually imposed. Alright, so now let's look at what happens when the tariff is being imposed. So if the tariff being imposed, there would have been the leftward shift of the supply curve, okay, the world supply curve from SW to SW1, okay, where the vertical distance over here is actually reflecting the tariff on imports. Alright, so that actually has the effect of raising the price from PW to PW plus T. Okay, so this is that at this new price PW plus T, what would have been the effect, okay, is that it would have actually led to a increase in quantity supplied by the domestic producers of QST, okay, whereas the quantity demanded by the consumers would have been QDT. Okay, so this goes to show that, oh, the amount of imports has actually decreased from the M, which is like QSQD, to QSTQDT. So this M over here in green is actually the new imports following the tariffs on imports. Now let's look at the effect on the consumer and the producer surplus, as well as how it actually affects the society at large. Alright, so at this price PW plus T, okay, what's going to happen is that at this higher price, we know that the consumer surplus would have been reduced to this area here, okay, this smaller triangle here. Why? Because this is based on the analysis of QDT, okay, which is actually being transacted now. Okay, because based on QDT, the quantity that they have consumed has decreased to QDT, and so what consumers are willing and able to pay is the area under the demand curve QD, okay, as in demand curve DD, but what they actually pay is PW plus T. So the difference would have been, the red triangle, okay, minus of the orange triangle, to give rise to a loss of consumer surplus that is given by area 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, area 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so what happens is that with area 1, okay, what exactly is area 1? Is that because the domestic production has increased from QS to QST. And so what happens is that with this increase in the price from PWT to from PW to PW plus T, the quantity supplied by the domestic producers increased from QS to QST. So this will mean to say that the producer surplus will have increased, okay, by area 1. Okay, so this is the increase in producer surplus, because what happens is that what the producers are willing and able to pay, okay, is actually given by, or rather what the producers are willing to produce is actually given by the area that is under the supply curve, which is this area here. Let me just do a check for you. Okay, so it is this area here. This is what the producers are prepared to supply. Okay, but the thing is that what they are willing to produce is actually, or rather what they actually receive is actually this area here. Okay, so which means to say that if you compare this blue area, okay, this blue area less of the yellow area, okay, which is this, it will give rise to a new producer surplus, which is this entire area. Okay, which means to say that, you know, previously, because the producer surplus was this blue shaded area triangle, okay, now it has increased to this whole blue area here, okay, blue triangle here. So this explains why area 1 will have been the increase in producer surplus. Okay, increase in producer surplus. Now let's look at area 3 for simplicity. Area 3, because what happens is that the amount of imports has actually decreased from QSQD to QSTQDT. And so with this as the new imports, okay, what happens is that the government would actually be receiving this amount of tax, which is this T per unit of tax multiplied by this quantity. So this whole area here, okay, this whole area here, let me just do another coloring. Okay, so this whole area here would have been the tax revenue to the government. Okay, tax revenue to the government due to the imposition of the tariff. Okay, so now that leaves us with area 2 and 4. So what exactly are these two area 2 and 4? They are actually what we call the deadweight loss, okay, which I shall now highlight it in black. Okay, so this area here, this triangle 2 and this triangle 4 are actually the deadweight loss. Okay, let me explain area 4 first. So what happens is this, that because the quantity transacted after the imposition of tariff has actually reduced the amount consumed from QD to QDT. Okay, so there's now been a decrease in the quantity transacted from QD to QDT. So there's actually a cost as well as a benefit, okay, due to this fall in consumption of the good. So what is the gain? Okay, the gain would actually be this shaded area here. Okay, why is that so? Because this shaded area here would have been what the society would have to incur for having to import QD/QDT previously. Okay, because they were part of the imports of QSQDT prior to the imposition of the imports. So what happens is that now that there is actually, you know, a fall in consumption of the good following the tariff, so which means to say this orange shaded area here would have been what the society is able to save without having to import these goods anymore. Alright, but the thing is that there is actually a greater deadweight loss that arises from the loss of satisfaction that could actually be derived if these QD/QDT amount of goods were consumed instead. So the loss of satisfaction that is actually due to the underconsumption of the good by QD/QDT, okay, the fall in consumption of the good QD/QDT, is actually this trapezium over here in red. Okay, in red. So as you can see, the loss or satisfaction as given by the red trapezium, okay, less of the orange shaded area, which is the gain from the fall in consumption. So the black triangle over here will then give us the deadweight loss from the fall in consumption of the good following the tariff. Alright? Okay, now let's move on to area 2, okay, which is this black triangle over here. So now what happens is this, that the imposition of the tariff would have increased the price of the good, okay, from PW to PWT as mentioned. So what happens is that following the law of supply, when there's an increase in the price, there will have been an increase in the quantity supplied by the producer, which is from QS to QST. So as a result of this, right, what we say is that there is a loss as well as a gain. So what is the loss? The loss is actually given by this area here, which let me shade this, okay, it's given by this area here, which is the area under the supply curve, because this is what is to be incurred by the society, okay, this is what's going to be incurred by the society for this extra QSQDT of the good that is actually being now produced by the domestic producer, followed by the imposition of tariff. Okay, so with this extra production by the domestic producer, the extra cost incurred will have to be this trapezium, which is the area under the domestic supply curve. However, there's also a cost saving, okay, which is a gain to the society, because for not having to import these goods, okay, the society could have actually saved this rectangle here, or this square, okay, because previously this QSQST used to be part of the imports of QSQDT. So now that QSQST is actually produced by the domestic producer, so this means that this PW times QSQST would have been the amount, okay, that could have been saved for not having to spend on imports. But since the loss, okay, of additional production by domestic producers as given by the orange trapezium over here, since the loss actually outweighs the gain from this additional production by domestic producer, therefore the resultant deadweight loss is this triangle area 2. Alright, okay, so this is basically the quick tip for today. I hope you enjoy this quick tip and I hope it actually benefits you. Okay, see you next time.